My guest today is Ernest James. He's the host of Deal to Heal, and he's a man who's been carrying a particular kind of father example into, I think, today's world that's kind of forgotten what one looks like. Ernest grew up one of 9 kids in a 2-parent home in Chicago, and he watched his father, build everything up and then lose everything to the point where they had to sleep on the floor with all of the kids and then rebuild. And he did all of that without leaving. And he Ernest watched his father sit beside his wife through 6 months of cancer until she was gone. And I think one of your sayings is for better or worse. And you don't just say it as a slogan. You saw it happen twice. Now Ernest is a father, a stepfather, twice divorced, and he's released some 240 episodes of a podcast of what comes after a wreckage. Today, we're going to talk about the father he had, the father he became, and who he's still becoming, and what it takes to stay friends with the woman he couldn't stay married to. Ernest, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I love that introduction. It makes me think like, you talking about me?
Well, I'm talking about your father and what he taught you. So yeah, I am talking about you. But that's probably a good place to start with him. Tell me about the man, not really the lesson, but who he was.
Yeah. Yeah. So my dad's still here, still kicking, you know,
Sorry,
hard to
who he
hard to
is.
stay up with, right? So he gets around. We have to get on him sometime because he got 9 kids and he'll just go out of town or whatever, just be gone. And we were like, where's dad? So we have to get on him like, Dad, you got 9 kids. Let somebody know where you're at, or where you're going, And it's always funny when that switch turns from the parent becoming the child and the child becoming the parent, and now you got to parent your parents. But he's a hardworking man, came from a good family, was a mechanic. He was a jet mechanic in the service. Definitely a car mechanic. He worked for the phone company back when it was Illinois Bell. So that was quite some time ago. But that allowed us to have a very nice lifestyle, at that time. I don't think my mom was working at that time. I think she was a stay-at-home mom, but she did work in ministry, like in the church. So she did, ministry wise, but I don't think she had a job per se. A lot of different things that she did entrepreneurship wise, but never an actual job like where she had to go to every day. But my dad provided for us, and so we lived a middle. I like to say middle to um, lifestyle, but it probably just middle. But we had the American dream, right? We had the house with the picket fence. We had the dog. We had the 2-car garage. We had a camper where we would take vacations in the summer and things like that. So we had a good lifestyle. And my dad was a hardworking man, and he made that happen. So my mom and dad, like you said, 9 children. I'm the oldest of the boys. I have 5 sisters and 3 brothers. So there's 9 of us all together. Same mom and dad, and my parents were married my entire life, like my whole existence. They were married until my mom passed away a couple years ago from cancer. But that's my dad in a nutshell, man. Just a hardworking old school guy. Back in the days when they didn't say I love you too much. It was like I'll show you, but I won't tell you. That has changed somewhat after my mom passed. My dad it's like after my mom passed, my dad became a lot more emotionally expressive. Growing up, he would always say, uh, respect your love. No, love your mother and respect me. That was his whole thing. He was like, I don't even care if you like me, but love your mother and respect me. And that was always his thing. So he wasn't very affectionate unless he was drinking. So if he had something to drink, then he was overly expressive and he come and want to kiss you and everything. I'm like, come on, Dad, get off me, man. But on a regular day, he's really kind of low key or whatever, and just like, hey, just do what you're supposed to do. And so, yeah, that was him in a nutshell. Or that is him because he's still here. So that's him in a nutshell.
What kind of lessons did you get from him, especially in those times where it was harder?
You know what? To not give up, you know what I mean, and to never stop working. So the story is when we end up moving to another state from where we were, and he was transferred to that other state, and we worked there. We lived there for like 2 years. And when we came back to Chicago, for whatever reason, I don't know all the details or whatever, but they wouldn't transfer him back. Like they transferred him to the other state, but then they wouldn't transfer him back to Illinois, even though we moved back to, Chicago, Illinois. And for whatever things that transpired, we end up losing everything. And so you got uh, a husband with 9 kids and a wife that goes from having their own house, having their own things, living this, middle class lifestyle that was nice and comfortable, to all 12 of us sleeping on the floor in my grandmother's house, and it's one bedroom, and so all of us being in this one room was not enough room for furniture and stuff. I think it was like one bed in the room, and that probably was it, and then the rest of it was like all of us in there with, our clothes and whatever things that we had. And so it took a while for my parents to rebuild. It took a while for them to get things back, on track. But during that time period, two things that really stuck out with me. Number one, my dad didn't leave. It's like when you think about, see, in this climate today, a lot of people don't have that sticking power. They don't have that, hang in there power no more. And so when you got someone who was successful as a provider and then loses everything, there have been guys who had less kids and less responsibility that has been like, you know what, I'm out. I'm just gonna worry about me, and you guys got to fend for yourself. But that wasn't my dad. He stayed, and not only he stayed, my mom stayed. Like they stayed together throughout the whole thing. And again, it was took some years for them to rebuild and to get us back comfortable and get another house and, get us back on our feet as a family. But again, he stuck through it and he worked hard, and, my mom supported him, and, we made it through that and got back on top, and we've been all right, since then. So that's one of the biggest lessons that I learned from him, like hard working and working with my hands. That was something that he always said too. So I am a 20 plus year bricklayer, production bricklayer. When we were younger, that was one of the things that he said. He was like, get something that no one can take away from you. Like learn a skill that no one can take away from you. And especially if you learn to work with your hands, because if you learn to work with your hands, you can always build something or create something or do something. And again, he was a mechanic, and he was always say, I'm not going to make you do what I do, but learn to do something, especially with your hands. And so that kind of led me into the field that I went into, construction. And I've been, again, a bricklayer for 23 years now, I think. So yeah, that's the main thing that I think, he taught me, especially during that time period.
As you were rebuilding, what did your mom hold while he was rebuilding?
So my mom, she didn't have a job per se. That's what I said, but she had a lot of entrepreneurship things that she did. So she was the candy lady at one time. So she sold candy, and the kids would come to the house and buy candy and stuff. She had a t-shirt business way before it was as popular as it is now. So she had the press and stencils and all that stuff. So she made t-shirts. We sold a lot of stuff. So she would go to like the I can't think of what they're called. I want to say warehouse, but that's not the word for it. But she would go to wherever they were selling stuff. Like when you go to get, I can't think of the word now. But we sold a lot of stuff. We sold T-shirts. We sold, uh, ceramic statues and piggy banks, just all kinds of little different things that we sold in Chicago. So if you are ever back, it still exists a little bit now. They changed a lot of the laws when it comes to peddling. But back then, if you were on the expressways and you come off the expressway in Chicago, and you will always see when you get to like that stoplight, it will be always people there on the side that will be selling stuff, whether it's peanuts or, incense, all different things. And so we did that as well. So while my dad was working or looking for a job, a regular job, we were doing our little entrepreneurial stuff, selling, whatever it was that we could get to sell. Wholesalers, that's the word I was looking for. So my mom would go to the wholesalers and she would buy at wholesale prices these different things, whether it was like I said, ceramic statues or, t-shirts or different things, and then we would sell them on the street. And so that's what we did. So that was kind of my introduction to entrepreneurship, through my mom, just learning how to just take whatever you can get and sell it and make a buck.
It sounds like there was a very strong sense of family, like everybody pulls together and faces in the same direction.
Yeah.
You attribute that to one or the other or both of them?
I would say both. I would say both because it was, especially back then. On my dad's side, it was a little different, right? So on my dad's side, the family structure was tight, but they were kind of like, all right, we're going to start from here, but you go out and you do what you need to do, and come back, sort of. So they like go to college, and some of them moved away and bought their own houses and things like that, but still tight knit, and education uh, focused as a family. On my mom's side, it was a little different because my grandmother was the baby of 12 siblings, right? And then she had 10 kids. And my mom was one of the 10. And then my mom had nine. I'm one of the nine, right? But on my grandmother's side, it was more like she liked everybody to stay together. You know what I mean? So where on my father's side, it was like, all right, start here and go out into the world. On my grandmother's side, it was like, you can go out, but come back. So they kind of kept everybody close together. So, and then funny story, growing up, the way that my mom and dad met, they literally lived right across the street from each other. So my uncle and my dad was best friends growing up, and so they was always around each other, and that's how my dad and my mom met. My uncle years later ended up passing away. My mom and dad was married and stuff by then, but that was kind of how they met each other. They lived literally right across the street from each other. So both families knew each other. Our grandparents knew each other, all of that stuff. So I think just from both sides. And then probably, I guess maybe that added on to it too, because they have known each other practically most of their life, and both families did too. It was easier I guess, for everybody to kind of stick together because they probably had been together their whole life already. So, but yeah, I think on both sides of the family, whether my dad's side or my mom's side, that family unit, two-parent households on both sides, you know, my grandfather on my dad's side worked at the phone company. That's how my dad ended up getting into the phone company once he came home from the service. I think my grandmother on my dad's side was a nurse. By the time I was born, she wasn't working either, so she was kind of stay at home. But the family structure on both sides was really tight, and I think that's what gave both of them that sticking power. Just like, all right, we're gonna stick together. And then again, they had the example. It was two-parent house on both sides. So it's like that's the example that you see, then that's the example that you follow. Like, all right, we stick it through. We make it work as a unit. And so that's it kind of played out that way as well.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you next. You said you saw her stick with him through rebuilding, and then he stuck with her through her illness.
Yeah.
And that's the same promise, just in a different direction. What did you understand about marriage from watching that? And maybe what didn't you fully get until later?
Well, you know what? That I don't think in my earlier years I paid attention too much to it. It wasn't until I got married, that I really kind of understood what that for better or worse meant, and thinking back on it and looking at the fact that from my dad's point of view of having to rebuild, having accomplished and provided all of this lifestyle for your family, and then the rug to be pulled from under you, and it all, the the house, the deck of cards, the house of cards all falls down, and yet being able to come home, to a wife that was supportive and was like, all right, we're gonna redo it, we're gonna rebuild it. And her sticking with him through that time period because it was hard, But then on the flip side, those years later, where when she got sick, and it was crazy. My mom, she would always say this when we was growing up, and we hated when she would say it, but she would always say, "I hope nothing ever happens to me that I have to depend on my kids to take care of me." And we were like, "Mom, why are you always saying that?" Because we're good kids and we loved my mom, but she would just always say that for some reason, and we was always like, "Mom, we got you. If anything happened to you, we got you." But just like from an early age, she would always say that. So I think, especially I can speak for myself, that kind of put a thing in the back of my mind that like, if anything ever does happen to her, I'm definitely gonna show up. And I would like to say that it was the same way with all of my brothers and sisters. And so when years later that, she got sick and we didn't know what it was. And so it got to the point where it was like, all right, we need to go to the hospital. And so we took her to the hospital, and we all, in the room when the doctor came in to, give us the news of what it was, and it was cancer, and it's like, okay, and so me personally, my mother-in-law at the time, previously, should I say, had cancer, and she had ended up passing away just maybe a couple years before this happened with my mom. And I could see, or I was able to see with her, the devastation that cancer can have on you, especially when it plays all the way out, And so I was able to watch that. And so when my mom got it, and it was kind of like, man, it's sort of I don't want to say I don't think it's a bad way to think. Um, but it may sound bad to those who haven't experienced it, that after my mom passed, because it was quick, so from the time we found out that it was cancer to the time that she passed away, it probably was like 6 months, so it was really quick. But having already lived through it with my mother-in-law at the time, I was glad that it didn't take as long. You know what I mean? I was glad that what I saw happen with my mother-in-law, I didn't have to endure with my mom. So while on one hand, definitely never wanted her to go, especially that way. If she had to go that way, I was glad it was as quick as it was, because I already had lived through watching someone that I cared about like go through that whole process. But during that time, that's where I got to see the for better or for worse on the other side of it, right? So you got the richness and, poor, richer, poor, which is like kind of like my dad's fight when when he was building and had to rebuild, and my mom stuck with him. But then on the other side, you got the sickness and health when my mom got sick. And to be able to show up as a child, me and my sisters and brothers all definitely was there to take care of her and make sure she was good. But then watching my dad do the same, and it was even days when he was like, you know what, I got this. And he would just send all of us away. And it would just be him and her for that day or for that time period where it was just the two of them. And another thing that was crazy that came out of that, what I didn't even know, because by this time I was already married and had my own family as well. After my mom passed, I remember coming to my dad's house, and he had his little coffee table, and he got like all these probably about 5 or 6 photo albums on the table. And so I sit down, I'm talking to him. So I picked up the photo album, and I'm flipping through the photo albums, and it's just a lot of pictures with him and my mom. But it's pictures of them doing like all kind of stuff and going to all kind of places and stuff that I had never seen. And I'm like, when did you guys do all this stuff? And I think that I would say the last maybe 2 or 3 years, it was like they were making up for lost time almost. And they probably didn't even know it. You know what I'm saying? But it was just like they had all these things that they had done together and places that they had been that I didn't even know about, and it's like it's sitting on this table with all these pictures, and I'm like flipping through all these pictures, and just like, okay. And it was like they had that moment in time before she got sick, so that I don't believe that it was any ill feelings or any shoulda, woulda, coulda type, emotions when she did get sick, because like, no, we had our time together. And like I said, my dad had his days, and he was like, I got this. Like, you guys go. And it just was the two of them. Being able to see that from both sides, to being able to see it from my mom sticking with him and sticking through it, and then him sticking with her, it definitely made a imprint on me, with the kind of marriage that I wanted for myself. It didn't necessarily work out for me the way that way, but that definitely was the goal.
You're kind of touching on divorce, and I want to transition to that gently here.
Yeah.
Mine felt like an utter failure. I was the first one in my family to get one, and my family pressured me to stay in some cases. And I imagine growing up for you in an environment where you're taught to stay together, that must have been hard to go through that divorce. How did that, walk me through that if you can?
So I've been married twice, and unfortunately divorced twice at this point. But that first marriage, when it got to that point, it was really heartbreaking for me, because that wasn't my example, right? So on my wife at the time, on her side, she was raised by a single mother, right? It was just her and her mom her whole life. Her mom got married later on or remarried later on, but she was an adult by then. But that was her reality, you know. But my reality was, you know, not only my parents being, you know, being raised in a two-parent household, but being raised in family on both sides that were two-parent households. You know, my grandparents, my uncles, my aunts, all of them, you know, married. And so with me having that example, that was always like, okay, that's what I want. And so when the reality kind of set in that, you know, we're actually finna get a divorce, that was heartbreaking for me. You know, and I think like you as well, was like, dang, I didn't make it. Like it was like a failure because it was like this was the blueprint that I've been following my whole life, you know, and now I'm here and unfortunately I couldn't make it work. You know what I'm saying? I couldn't, you know, get it to turn that page. So yeah, that was a hard thing for me after that my first marriage. My second marriage, I wanted it to work and I believe we could have worked, but I think when we got together, we hadn't healed from past hurts. So my second marriage, I married my friend, right? We've been friends since kindergarten. We got pictures of us in kindergarten together. That's how long we've known each other. And so even growing up, we end up going to church together, being raised up in the same church. So we've always been together, you know. And so when she got older, got married, you know, went her way. I got older, got married, went my way. Both of those marriages ended. And actually, her marriage, she was divorced long before I was. But by the time I got divorced, we hadn't seen each other in years. But we ended up reconnecting like after my divorce. And it was like old friends coming back together and, you know, and our relationship and everything. And I think we kind of started where we left off emotionally, you know, as far as the love for one another. And it was like, hey, you know, from where we left off as kids. And so we kind of fell in love again and got married and blended our families, but not having healed from some of the past hurts from past relationships and all of that. After a couple of years, it started showing up in our marriage, you know, and unfortunately, it was just some things that some things we couldn't learn on the, you know, what's say learn on the job. There was some things you just couldn't learn on the job, and some heals that some traumas you couldn't heal on the job. Like these, it was work that should have been done before we came back together. But the good thing out of that, one of the things that happened going through coming going through that marriage, and even getting to the part where we started talking about divorce, one of the things that was very important to me and to her was that we didn't lose our friendship, even though we was losing the marriage, because we had been friends longer than we had been married, you know. And not only have we been friends, but our families was friends. You know, like I said, we grew up in the same church, so her mom and my mom was really close friends, you know. And then even to the fact when she got married and her first child was born, her first son, my mother became his godmother. You know what I mean? So it's like we have too much real family that's connected for us to lose everything just because this part of it didn't work. So we were very intentional about, okay, let's work through how we're going to do this divorce, what it's going to look like, how we're going to get past it. And then once we get through that, making sure that we kept our friendship intact, making sure we kept our relationships with the kids intact, make sure we kept the relationship with our, you know, extended family, whether it's church family and all those other relationships that was already built before the marriage, like making sure all of those relationships stayed intact, even though this part of it didn't. And we've been able to do that. We've been able to do that. It's been about 6 or 7 years now. So we still great friends. We got two grandbabies now. You know, we get together for parties for the grandbabies and things like that. I'm very active in the lives of my sons still. And she's very active in the life of my daughter. And so we've been able to make it work.
Can we talk about stepfathering for a bit here?
Yeah.
Because you went into a house where, if I have this right, it was four boys and you brought in your own daughter.
Yep.
And that I imagine takes a special kind of father. I don't have stepkids. I got two boys.
Yeah.
And you don't get those early years. You don't, and you know, there was a man there before you and you know, all of the navigating that requires. So how do you warm those relationships up to the point where you it survives something like a divorce?
So I'll start here. One of the things that I learned really early was that I was blessed to have my dad in my life. And I seen how my friends growing up, my friends, in fact, even some of my family whose fathers weren't active, to be able to see the difference in between my upbringing and kind of theirs, even though they're around. And just from an early age, it was I kind of just thought to myself, like, I want to be not necessarily a stepfather, but I wanted to be a mentor. I'm like, I want to be a mentor. I want to be a person to be able to give like the lessons and things that I learned from my dad to other people who fortunate enough to be raised with their fathers for whatever reason. And this was just a mindset that I had from really young. So fast forward when it came to becoming a stepfather. And also was easier for me in this particular space because again, I was already in their life somewhat because we've known each other. Again, our families was connected. So I was always around. So it wasn't like they didn't know me. So it wasn't a cold relationship where I met their mom and then she introduced me to the kids. I already knew the kids. We already had a relationship already. So when we decided to get married and come together, it was an easy blend of the families, somewhat. Still, it is, still an adjustment period, but it wasn't cold. It was a warm feeling, coming in. But one of the things when I came in and I began to talk to the boys, one of the things I told them off the bat was, I need you to remember two things. I need you to remember that I love you, and I need you to remember that I have your best interests at heart. So I said, no matter what happens from day one moving forward, if you can remember those two things, then we'll be okay. Because I knew the day was going to come where we have to have the conversation of, you're not my dad. I knew the day was going to come where I, was leading them or trying to instruct them in a way that they may not have wanted to go, and may have been some pushback. So I knew these things was coming, in the future. So I was just like, let me set this foundation now that know that I love you. So no matter what, if you don't like me, if we disagree, whatever happens, if you know that I love you and you know that I have your best interests at heart, then even though you're not happy with me in this moment, if you know those two things, it'll pass. You know what I mean? And we'll still be okay. And so that's how I came in, and that's how I kind of navigated that space. And also letting them know, I'm like, I know I'm not your father and I'm not trying to replace him, but I will stand in the gap until he shows up. Right. And so even his father, I knew his father. So when his father would come around, it was an open door policy. Like, hey, when you decide to come over, like, you got full access. I'm not the one, but like, no, you can't see him. What I'm like, no. And I remember doing a podcast, and a guy asked me, we were talking about it, and he was like, did that make you feel some type of way? Like when he would come around, and of course the kids were like, oh, my dad's here, whatever. Like, did that make you feel some type of way as you being the stepfather and you being the one who's here all the time? And now he gets to show up, like holiday dad, you know what I mean? And like, yay, dad's here. And I'm like, no, that didn't make me feel no type of way because I was raised with my father. And that's what it's supposed to be. Like, they supposed to want to be with their dad. You know what I mean? So I was happy for them when he would come around. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, man, you get to build this relationship with him, that you didn't necessarily get on a day-to-day basis. And so my thing, I always was like, no, it's open door. Like, I was always happy when he would come around. Not for me, I was happy for them because I know what it was like to be raised with my dad and see my dad every day. They didn't necessarily have that experience. So when they did have the experiences when he came around, I was happy. I was happy for them. And then we got along too. So it wasn't, I was just kind of cool and everything. But yeah, I was happy for them that, whenever he did come around.
That almost sounds like you're taking your ego out of the equation and you want what's best for the kids. Like, it just
Yeah.
sounds as simple as that. Like it I don't know. That's a beautiful moment.
Yeah. And that's what it was, really, just coming in and really like wanting the best for them. And, you know, I would always say that I would like to think that the best for them is to be around their father. On the flip side, I can't necessarily make him show up as much as I would like for him to show up. But when he does show up, I can make sure that everybody's comfortable and everybody, has a chance to bond the way that they should bond as a father and son, you know. And there was some adjustments, over the years, especially as they got older. We did have the arguments of the "you're not my dad" and all that stuff did come up. But I always say this: the funny thing, one of the funny things I always laugh about is out of my four stepsons, I had one that we always bumped heads. I'm like, just all growing up, we just bumped heads all the time. And out of the four, now they all young adults. He's the one that says, "I love you" the most to me. You know what I'm saying? And it's crazy. I just laugh, but like, cause you would never think that we would have this relationship now, because coming up, man, it was rough. He was the one that gave me the most, just always bumping heads. But now as a young adult, he's the one that says, "I love you" the most, when he sees me, and be like, "All right, I love you. I'll see you later," or whatever. So you never know, in the midst of it, you got to just show up the best that you can and be true to what you want from them, and what you want for them. And I think that, over time, especially as they, you know, grow and become young adults and, start having kids of their own, because I have two beautiful granddaughters now, then all those lessons that I was trying to teach them starts to come up. And now we're having the conversations again, but now we're having the conversations as young adults and being able to say, "Now I understand what you were trying to teach me," and still having that relationship now where, okay, well, we're here now. Let me help you navigate this space too. But it's been a good ride. I would say it's been a good ride. And again, we're all still close, and we all still, tight knit. So I think I did something right.
You realized throughout your dating that every woman you'd ever dated was a fatherless daughter, and that sent you on a quest. It sounds like it sent you to
Yeah.
Instagram first, and then other podcasts, and then creating your own.
Yeah.
What did that pattern teach you about the wound of an absent father, and especially that you couldn't see until you actually identified it?
Yeah, you know what? It was crazy because it was something I didn't even notice until after my second divorce. Because after my second divorce, I really started looking at, okay, what part did I play in the downfall? Not only the downfall of my second marriage, but my first marriage as well. Because I'm like, I want to be a better person. So I don't want to just look at things and say, well, this is what they did and they did this or said this or whatever. But what was my part? What part did I play? But in the midst of, you know, really examining things, it was like, okay, my first wife, I was raised by a single mother. I was a fatherless daughter, and so was my second wife. Then I started thinking about just my dating history, period. And I was just like, every woman I dated was a fatherless daughter. And I'm like, I don't know how that happened. And I said, well, for whatever reason, either I'm attracted to fatherless daughters or they're attracted to me, but we keep connecting. What can I do to help this demographic of women that I keep coming in contact with? So I started a page on Instagram called Friends to Fatherless Daughters. Just was going on there, kind of giving my viewpoint as a girl dad, as a brother to five sisters, and watching my dad raise my five sisters. And then also at this time, I started doing more research on fatherless daughters and reading books and things about it. And so I just was went to Instagram and just was kind of sharing my advice, and had been doing that for maybe a couple months. And a young lady reached out to me and was like, I'd like to have you on my podcast. And at that point, I had never did a podcast. I had never been on a podcast. I didn't even listen to podcasts at that point. But I was like, okay, I'll do it. And so I did the podcast with her. After I did that first one, within like a couple, like right after I did that one, I ended up getting called maybe for like six more podcasts asking me to be a guest on their podcast. And so I was like, all right, cool. So I did all of those podcasts. And so I was able to meet one of the hosts. One of the podcasts that I did was a podcast called Dads on Purpose. And it was two young fathers, and they kind of mentored, other fathers, young fathers as well. And so I was on there, and one of the hosts I was able to meet in person, because we did our podcast virtual, but I was able to meet him in person. I went to Texas. I was in Texas. He lived in Texas. And I was like, let's meet, meet for lunch or whatever. And we did. And so in the midst of our conversation, he was like, I think you should have your own podcast. And I said, okay. Again, I was fresh to the podcast scene, didn't know much about it, but I started looking into it and ended up starting the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. And on that podcast, my guest and I talk about topics and ways to help us to heal in every area of our lives. And I talk about things that I've been through: divorce, depression, suicidal ideations. And for things that I haven't been through, I bring on other coaches and authors or whoever to talk about their experience, all in the hopes that we can leave the audience with some tips and tools to help them get through whatever it is that they're going through. And so we're on like 240 some episodes of that podcast. I also started another podcast called Girl Dad Discussions, which kind of goes back to the fatherless daughter space, because as being a girl dad myself, I know a lot of other girl dads. I know a lot of other fathers that are very active in the lives of their children as well as their daughters specifically. And I wanted to amplify those voices, because we hear about the deadbeat dads, we hear about the fatherless daughters, we hear all those stories, but it's like, well, where are the stories of the fathers like me, who are active in our daughters' lives, who have great relationships with our daughters? And so I started the Girl Dad Discussions podcast, where I have conversations with other girl dads and sometimes even the daughters. I have daughters on, and we just talk about that daddy-daughter relationship and how special it is, and all the things that goes into it, in order to combat that narrative of the absent father and the fatherless daughter. But going back to your original question, some of the things that I did notice was just how much that I would have more conversations with the fatherless daughters themselves, and one of the things that they always say is like, I'm okay. It's like, I'm okay. I did this, I've achieved this and all of that. And I would say, well, you don't know if you're okay if you don't have anything to reference it against. Like if your father's never been in your life, then you don't know what that looks like. So you can't say you're okay because you don't even know what you're missing. You don't even know what you didn't get. You don't even know the guidance and the opportunity and the things that he would have provided to your life, because you have no example of what that looks like. And one of the questions I would always ask them, I would say, how many generations of fatherlessness came before you? So you're a fatherless daughter. Was your mother a fatherless daughter? Was her mother a fatherless daughter? Was your great grandmother a fatherless daughter? And so when I would ask them that and they would sit and think about it, sometimes it actually went back like 4 or 5 generations of fatherless daughters. And one of the things that I learned in this journey of dealing with fatherless daughters was that there's a statistic that says there's a high percentage of fatherless children will give birth to fatherless children. So that's on whether it's fatherless sons or fatherless daughters. If they are raised in a fatherless household, when they begin to have children themselves, those children will end up being fatherless as well, And so when I would have the fatherless daughters kind of look back and say, well, how many generations came before you? And they're able to recognize, like, okay, yeah, it has been like 3 or 4 generations of fatherless daughters. Then I would always ask, well, how many will come after you? Or will you begin to get the healing, the inner healing and things of that nature for yourself, so that you don't continue to pass these traits on to, your children, and then it keeps continually. Like somebody has to recognize that I have a father wound, that needs to be healed, so I don't continue to pass it on, to the next generation. And sometimes that's hard for them to admit, and hard for them to come to terms with. But like, if you look at it that way and you really look at the generations before you, like, it's turned into a pattern and somebody got to break it, And so I challenge them to, get the help that they need and try to mend the best they can the relationships between their children and their fathers, so that they have some kind of relationship, especially with their daughters, so that moving forward, they're not getting some of those same traits and some of those same missing pieces in their lives that only a father can provide.
What is it that only a father can provide?
So I wrote an ebook called The Four Core,
Hmm.
which is the 4 core values that a daughter. I wrote an ebook called The Four Core Values That Every Daughter Should Get from Her Father. And how I came up with the four core was I looked at myself as a father and the things that I wanted to give to my daughter, the things that I've watched my dad give to my sisters, as me having five sisters, and my observation with the fatherless daughters that I was in contact with. Like, what at its core, what were those values that every daughter should get from her father? And so it's guidance, affirmations, love and affection, and protection. So guidance would be that the knowing or the teaching of how to operate with facts over feelings. Because as we know, our daughters and just, women in general are emotionally driven individuals. And so there are times where you can't act out of your emotions. You got to act out of the facts, because if you act out of your emotions, whatever it is that you're trying to do may not work, because your emotions, you might feel one way now and then you'll feel a different way and 10 minutes from now, but this decision that you made, based off how you felt 10 minutes ago, now it doesn't work. And so that kind of direction. And also, I would say not just, like the good or bad decisions, like teaching them to make good or bad decisions, but also better or best decisions, right? And so I always give this example when my daughter wanted to buy her first car. And so she came to me and she's like, Dad, I wanna buy I wanna buy a car. I'm saving up my money. I got this down payment I wanna have, which is a good decision. Like, that was a good move. But what I said to her was, well, let's work on your credit. Let's make sure your credit is straight. That way you can go in there, sign your name on the paper and walk out with a car and still have your down payment. You know what I mean? Like, if your credit is good enough, you could do that. So that would be a best decision. But just teaching them how to make those decisions, teaching them that guidance of just on an everyday basis, how to operate in a certain way to make them more successful. So that would be the guidance piece.
Why is that specific to fathers?
Well, it's not. It's not, but it is something that fathers bring. Like the mom has her place as well to giving that same guidance, but just from the viewpoint of a father and a mother, it's coming from different viewpoints. So it's not only getting the guidance from the father and not the mother, but there's a sense of guidance that a father brings that the mother just doesn't, because it's just a different lens from men and women and from mothers and fathers. And that's just what that is. But the second one is affirmations, right? And I would say affirmations is telling your daughter something that she should already know, but it hits different when she hear it from you, right? So it's that affirming of who she is. Like, you are beautiful, you are smart, you are capable, you are enough, building her up, building that self-esteem up. This is how you carry yourself, and this is how you show up in the world this way so that you're respected, in a certain way, or you're seen in a certain way. So just building her up with those affirmations on a day-to-day basis, because you are your daughter's first love when it comes to a man, or you should be your daughter's first love when it comes to a male. Like, she looks up to her father. She's either going to be attracted to men just like you or just the opposite of you, depending on how you show up in her life. You know what I'm saying? And so you want to show up in a way where you're affirming her and lifting her up, so that then her example that she's attracted to, hopefully, is men that affirm her and lift her up as well. And not just men, but just people in general, whether it's, friendship with her friends growing up, or, whoever. If she's confident within herself because you built her up, and she know who she is from you, then it's easier for her to show up that same way when she goes out into the world. The other one is love and affection. And this one is important because, again, your daughter will look at you as that first example of what a relationship look like, what a relationship between a man and a woman should look like. So she'll pay attention to how you interact with her mom. She'll pay attention to how you interact with her. She'll pay attention to how you interact with other women that you may not even be in a relationship with, but just a friendship or just a casual, woman that you might pass on the street. Like, the woman at the restaurant who might be your waitress. How do you react with them? How do you treat them? How do you respect them? All of those play a part in her learning what affection looks like, or what love and affection should look like from a male perspective. and so you want to set that precedent too. So when she does decide to start dating, like, okay, what should this look like? What does love look like? There's a difference between showing what that looks like. Sometimes they may be misconstrued, or if they see a negative representation of that in the household. So you have to set that example of what it should be or shouldn't be, so that she knows what that is when she goes forward into the world. And that last one is protection. As dads, we usually, the first thing we think about with protection is the physical protection. You got to deal with me, or you say something that hurt my daughter, I'm coming for you. But I always say another part of protection is, like, I like to call it safety, and that safety comes with them feeling safe enough to be who they are, feeling safe enough to show up like they want to show up, to have a voice that they want to have, safe enough to express themselves in whatever way that is. You don't have a say so, but it's our job as fathers to instill that in them. Like, no, you do have a voice, and your voice matters. So if something happens that you don't like, or something happens that you're not comfortable with, you can speak on that. And when we build their confidence and we give them that protection to be safe enough to be open, have that open dialogue with us as fathers as they grow, then when they go out into the world, it'll be even more easier for them to stand up for themselves and to use their voices when there's some kind of injustice or something happens that they don't agree with, to be able to be like, no, I don't agree with that. I don't think that it should be happen, that should happen this way, or whatever it is. And so I just think that protection has to go further than just the physical protection, but it also has to include that protection to just be able to stand up and be confident enough to stand up in who she is and use her voice and to show up in spaces confidently. And I think that's part of our deal as a father, to instill that. So again, that's the 4 core: guidance, affirmations, love and affection, and protection. So I think those are those core values that a dad should bring to his daughter.
You talked about missing fathers going back generations. Now that you have grandchildren,
Mhm.
what are you seeing being passed forward, and especially what are they picking up that you didn't have to teach them?
You know what? So I was, I'll say it this way. Unfortunately, when you're a step parent, no matter what all you want to teach them, they're always going to reflect it back on their parents, right? So in my son's life, his father was killed when he was really young. So he grew up without a dad. And their mother, her mom and her dad got divorced when she was really young. So she grew up without a dad. So there are some dynamics just coming from both of their biological parents, I don't know, behavior, should I say, that might just kind of come along. So even though I'm from a two-parent household way, so I got two granddaughters by my two oldest stepsons. One of them did get married. What, did both of them get married? I got to think about that now. I think one of them got married, the other one didn't. They were married when they had their kids. My first granddaughter definitely, they weren't married. They had my first granddaughter while they were in like their last year of high school. So they weren't married. So there are some things that even now I still try to encourage them to do. Try your best to have a good relationship with the mom for your daughter, because you don't want you guys' relationship to interfere with your relationship as a father, and to, no matter what, I always think about what's in the best interest of the child. The same way when I came into their life and I told them, like, know that I have your best interest at heart. All of that other stuff is going to happen. But if you know that I have your best interest at heart, it'll be okay, And so I try to instill that with them the same way. Like, make sure that you're always focusing on what's in the best interest of your daughter. Because you and the mom might not be together. You may not never get back together. But you can't allow you guys' relationship to interfere with the relationship that you have with your child. So you got to show up, with doing what's the best for her. And so I would like to think some of the things that I taught them still shows up, but as young adults, I don't have as much say in what they do with their kids. I could just only show up and advise them as they grow. But they're still in their 20s, so it's still, they're still learning, they're still young. but just like, okay, and I just try to show up and advise them the best that I can.
And I guess that's the work, right? Just show them show them through your example and
Yeah.
let them decide and be there to pick them up if they ask for it.
Yeah, yeah, and sometimes it's hard as a step parent. I remember when we got married, and my daughter came. My daughter and my ex-wife, they connected like right away. Because again, she had 4 sons. She didn't have any daughters, and so now this little girl comes to our family. Or should I say, into her life now as a blended family. And they hit it off great. They have, even now, my daughter just turned 23 a couple weeks ago. They have an amazing relationship even now. But in those earlier years, because of other influences, it began to challenge that relationship that they had. And so there were conversations that we would have, and she's like, "Man, I'm trying to be the best I can for her, but these other people are saying this and that, and trying to make me look a certain way in her eyes, make me look bad in her eyes and whatever." And one of the things I told her, I said, "You have to show up the best way that you can." And right now she's young, but as she grows older, and she will be able to recognize, even though these people have said all of this negative stuff about you, her experience with you, if none of that stuff shows up, she'll eventually realize that's not the truth. She'll eventually realize as she grows that, you know what, you guys said she, was this type of person, but whenever she interacted with me, it was only love. You guys said she was this, but when I came around, this is how she treated me. And so that's what I told her at an early age, and she took that advice and really just stayed focused on her relationship with my daughter. And like I said, now my daughter's in her 20s, and they have an amazing relationship, and it was able to outlive all of the negative and things that she had heard from when she was little that weren't true in the first place. But you get those outside influences. But when you stay true to the love that you have for the child, and you show them that, as they grow and as they mature, they will recognize what true love is and what true relationship is. And if that's true in your relationship with them, they'll recognize it, and it'll be all right.
You're 240 some up episodes deep into your podcast. You've got a platform, you've got a community, you've got your ebook. What are you working on for what's your next project? What are you working on that nobody's seen yet? And what are you building towards?
Well, I'm getting into doing more workshops virtually. I was always doing like different workshops because I'm a mental health advocate as well. And
Mhm.
after losing my mom, I went into depression. I had suicidal ideations and all of those things. And so coming out on the other side of it, I've always spoken. I actually did my first TEDx talk um, maybe 2 years ago, talking about my bout with suicidal ideations and how my daughter pretty much saved my life, at her young age, which gave me the will to live, through that time period of having lost so much in that period. So I'm a mental health advocate, and so I've always talked about, grief and things of that nature, and overcoming grief, not overcoming grief, but embracing your grief, suicidal ideations, how to kind of overcome it and things of that nature. So I'm starting doing more workshops, around that now. And I built a school community on the school platform called Deal to Heal School for Living, where I offer some of those workshops, how to find your purpose, how to overcome failure, all of those type things. And so that's the newest things that I'm working on now, as well as doing more speaking engagements and going to more schools and other organizations to speak on different things. So that's what I'm working on the most now.
Where can people find out about you?
You can go to deal to heal dot no deal heal fulfill org, or you can go to my YouTube channel, Deal to Heal Podcasting Network on YouTube. There you will find all of my podcasts that I'm either producing or operating right now. And also you can just look me up on Facebook or Instagram as Ernest James, and I should come up.
I'll have links to that in the show notes.
Yeah, yeah. So yep. So I'm in different spaces, but if you type in Deal to Heal, uh, generally I'm gonna come up. Especially if you type it in on YouTube. If you type in my name, just Ernest James or Deal to Heal, on YouTube, you'll get a whole array of videos and things that I've done over the years.
That's the conversation. Just thanks for being here. I really appreciate the work you're doing. It's hard work and it comes, I think, without a lot of fanfare, and the reward takes a really long time
Right.
to to register. But yeah, thanks for speaking on this and naming the things that a lot of men won't. It's that quiet work of staying inside relationships, and even when they get difficult, like with an ex. So yeah, links will be in the show notes. If you're somewhere on that road yourself, you know where to find them. Until next time, thanks.
Thank you.